Welcome back in. Today we're going to be discussing six of my favorite must-draft wide receivers heading into 2024. We're going to start things off with Garrett Wilson, who's currently ADP is wide receiver 8 or 11th overall. Last season on one of the worst offenses in the league last year, Garrett Wilson had 95 catches, 1,000 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. He averaged 12.5 fantasy points per game, but he had a 17.8 expected fantasy points per game, which would have put him at wide receiver 5 overall. Now, obviously, the quarterback play is really what killed this offense. What a shame, because we've kind of been waiting for Garrett Wilson to kind of be able to put it all together and really have that monster breakout season. We just haven't had it yet, mainly because the quarterback play has been so atrocious. They thought they figured it out last year with adding Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, that didn't last long at all. And so it really derailed everything. I think as long as Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy this year, which he'll be a full year removed from the Achilles injury, I do think that Garrett Wilson is set to explode this year. They added Mike Williams, who's not somebody I'm really all that concerned with. The amount of injuries, especially the devastating injuries coming off of once again, it's not something I'm really all that concerned with. I think Garrett Wilson could flirt with 28-30% target share once again in this offense. They also drafted Malachi Corley, so he easily finished as a top 5 wide receiver in 2024. So if you're picking at the back half of the first, Garrett Wilson is an easy click for me. So let's keep it moving here. Let's talk about a rookie wide receiver, and it is Malik Nabers, wide receiver 24. Now, if I have to make a decision between Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers right now, I think it's easily Malik Nabers, and I think it's mainly because of the difference in where you're selecting these two guys. Malik Nabers is going in the 40s compared to Marvin Harrison, who's flirting with being a top 12 wide receiver already. Malik Nabers is right there in the same pedigree of prospect as somebody like Marvin Harrison. Last year, 1,500 receiving yards and 14 touchdowns for LSU. He was third in yards per route run. He was fourth in missed tackles forced per attempt. He was also 19th in deep catches with 624 deep yards, which is the second most among all wide receivers. Malik Nabers is an absolute baller, especially with the ball in his hands. He's tremendous, especially if you can get him in motion, get him out there into space. Malik Nabers is a tremendous wide receiver, and he enters a really good situation because there's really not any target competition. Darren Waller retired. Saquon Barkley is gone. Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, Wandell Robinson remain there, but none of them are really going to be a huge threat to Malik Nabers seeing a large target share. And let's keep in mind that while Daniel Jones is not some elite wide quarterback, I will definitely be the first one to say that, but he does tend to lock onto his first read. He targeted his first read on 70% of dropback last year, which was 66% of those going to wide receiver. Now, I get it. There's some hesitancy with taking a wide receiver, especially a rookie one, in like the fourth round. Why take a wide receiver that early? But I will say this. Since 2021, we've seen 7 wide receivers being selected in the top 15 of the NFL draft. 6 of those 7 posted top 32 wide receiver seasons. And we also had 2 of them finish nearly inside the top 12 with Jamar Chase and then Jalen Waddle finishing at 13. So I definitely think there's enough here for Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers is going to be the easy, unquestioned number 1 wide receiver. I think 140, 150 targets is well within the range of possibilities for him. While I get it, Daniel Jones is the most exciting quarterback. I do think he can at least support Malik Nabers to be able to finish as a probably high-end wide receiver 2 this year. So let's keep it moving, and let's talk about a wide receiver that I definitely don't understand why he's being valued where he is. That's wide receiver 25, 45th overall. That's Amari Cooper. Last year, he had 72 catches, 1,250 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. He averaged 15.1 fantasy points per game, which was 17th among all wide receivers. And we have to remember, they're almost half the season, and we were, a bunch of really bad quarterback play because Deshaun Watson got hurt. And it wasn't until later in the season, in week 13, when Joe Flacco took over. In the games with Deshaun Watson and Joe Flacco, he averaged 20 fantasy points per game. And I get it. Part of that was with Joe Flacco and that amazing run. But even with in the games with Deshaun Watson, he still averaged 17.2 fantasy points per game, which would have put him inside the top 10. And so I just think Amari Cooper is being undervalued. I don't quite get it. I mean, they brought in Jerry Jeudy. I don't know why we care about Jerry Jeudy at this point. Jerry Jeudy has shown no ability to be able to do anything in the NFL or be a consistent producer. So I don't think he's somebody that stands in the way of Amari Cooper at all. And being able to see a healthy target share last year, 23% target share. He was also 6th in deep targets, 10th in unrealized air yards. So that means there was a lot of meat left on the bone that it could have been an even better season than what he had. He was 3rd in yards per reception and 13th in yards per team pass attempt last year and 15th in yards per route run. So Amari Cooper, I think, sets up to be a very solid wide receiver 2. I currently have him as a high-end wide receiver 2, and I think that's where he should be going. I don't understand the wide receiver 25, but buy the dip. Let's keep it moving here, and let's talk about George Pickens, wide receiver 27, 48th overall. He's a player I don't understand some of the hate there is out there for George Pickens. He has gotten better each of the last 2 seasons he's been in the league. Heading into year 3, last year getting 22% target share, 15th market share of air yards, 10th in deep targets, 18.1 yards per reception, which was first among all wide receivers. Last year, he had 63 catches, 1,140 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. 12.3 fantasy points per game last year. He obviously had some major spike weeks, especially in the fantasy playoffs. He really, if you started him, really pushed you through into the fantasy championship. But he was 17th in yards per route run, 11th in yards per team pass attempt. But he had a 68.9% catchable target rate, which was 61st among all wide receivers. So, oh yeah, they also traded Deontay Johnson this year, and only really all they did was add Roman Wilson, who was a rookie. So George Pickens figures to stand in line and being the clear number one target earner within this offense. I get it. It's Russell Wilson. We're not overly excited about Russell Wilson, but I do think he pairs really well with George Pickens, especially with his ability to with the deep ball. Like I already mentioned, 10th in deep targets, 18.1 yards per reception last year, I think really pairs well with Russell Wilson and that ability to throw the deep ball. So George Pickens, I think, is a very fine value at wide receiver 27. Again, another player I think that could finish inside the top 20 this year. I know the offense isn't exciting, especially with bringing in Arthur Smith, but we have seen in years past whenever Arthur Smith at least had a quarterback with Ryan Tannehill was able to resurrect his career. So George Pickens, I think, is being a little bit undervalued. Rashid Shaheed is definitely somebody that we should be talking more about. Wide receiver 57 right now with a 14% target share last year, 46 catches, 719 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. He also averaged 10.4 fantasy points per game. He had 5 games of top 24 production last year. He was 17th in yards per target. Michael Thomas is gone, who had 64 targets through 10 games last year. Now they have a new offensive scheme with Clint Kubiak. Now I think this change in offensive scheme is going to help Rashid Shaheed because this offense last year was super basic. And I think now with Clint Kubiak, I think you're going to see a lot more play action. I think you're going to see a lot more motion. And I think that's going to really benefit somebody like Rashid Shaheed, who's phenomenal with the ball in his hands. In the 10 games that he's played where he's seen a 80% route participation, he's averaged 12.1 fantasy points per game with a 28% market share of air yards. So I think there's a lot to like here with Rashid Shaheed's profile. I think they try to get involved in space and motion and really utilize them that way. He is tremendous, like I said, in yards after the catch. So super explosive athlete. Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver 57th, is somebody that I'm definitely going to be targeting in the later rounds. Lastly, let's move over to Josh Downs, wide receiver 62 or 146th overall. Another player that I'm not real sure why he's going as late as he is. To me, last year, 68 catches, 771 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, 19.2 fantasy points per game. Honestly, outside of the touchdown department, his numbers are very, very similar to Jaden Reed, who's going at wide receiver 34 compared to Josh Downs, who's going at wide receiver 62. Last year, Josh Downs, 18% target share, 12th in deep targets, or he had 12 deep targets, 11 red zone targets, 371 yards after the catch, which was 19th most among all wide receivers. He was 29th in target separation. But Josh Downs was actually having a very, very solid season prior to the injury he suffered week 9. Josh Downs was actually averaging 12.6 fantasy points per game over the first 8 weeks of the season. And him and Michael Pittman were going back and forth. Really, if you look at it compared to Pittman, Josh Downs had 473 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns compared to Michael Pittman, who had 523 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. So they were neck and neck until that injury happened. And then I think that really derailed Josh Downs' season because he kind of fell off a cliff after that. So heading into a more healthy season, he's definitely going to be the slot wide receiver within this offense. This is still going to be a very fast paced offense. An offense is going to run a lot of plays with Shane Steichen. And I know they drafted Adonai Mitchell, but I think Adonai Mitchell is still a very raw prospect. I think he's going to be more of a deep threat, somebody they utilize that way. I think he's going to be someone that's going to run a lot of go routes, things like that, utilize his speed and his athleticism that way. But I think Josh Downs, who really showed a pretty solid rapport as well with Anthony Richardson before he got hurt, I just think he's a really solid pick, especially at wide receiver 62 in PPR formats. I think he's somebody that should be valued inside the top 50 wide receivers. Josh Downs is also a really incredible value. So that being said, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button for future content. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.